a lot of people write to me about this. It's when people, I mean, you don't even have to have been in a relationship with them for a long time, but they just evolve as people and they'll say, I don't know what to do. I've become really conscious of everything I'm doing. I've become maybe even a bit more spiritual or into self-improvement work. My husband doesn't understand me. I try and talk to him about these things and he just doesn't get it. And I don't know what to do. And I'm thinking of leaving the relationship, and they'll reach out to me to ask for advice. And I wonder, because you are the expert of this, it doesn't even have to be in that realm, but the fact that when people change, because we do sometimes change, say you're together with the person from the age of 25 or something and you're now in your 40s or 50s, you've evolved, but they haven't evolved with you, which is fine. But what do you do as a person if they're not then matching, I suppose, where you're at?
Well, yeah, you can get married at 22 and have very different values and expectations about relationship. I find often we wake up at 30 or 40 and we're thinking, gosh, I forgot all about myself, or maybe my
Mm.
life has never been about me. I think a lot of people after children experience that. And, Stan Tatkin talks about how the failure of relationship really comes down to the failure of creating agreements.
Mm.
And I fully agree with that. We don't, besides the vows we might make, which often we, sort of copy paste, uh, they're not clear agreements. I mean, no one taught me that when you're in the dating process, you should get clear about what are we actually creating together,
Yeah.
not just, hey, are we dating other people? That's the scariest question we generally ask, as opposed to like, what do you want to create? What's important to you? What are the values that this relationship is going to oscillate around? Well, if I started my relationship 15 years ago, not even thinking about that, and now I'm like, wait, I'm in this relationship that doesn't actually even honor my values. I'm not even sure if I like the person. And I start to explore, I start to do personal exploration, I start to explore my interests. Then I might invite them along that journey to explore those things too. And everybody has the right to choose if they want to join on that mission. But what I will say is that if people don't join or there's not some alignment, they will part.
Mm.
They will find someone else who's interested in the expansion that they're going through. I think to be conscientious of the person who's not changing, they're usually afraid that the change that's occurring is pulling their partner away from them, that they're going to get left because of this newly found fire. And so what they usually try to do is put out the fire, dim it, because they're afraid of it, because their own fire is out. And
Wow.
you
That's so
know,
interesting.
when you think about it, it's like people can hold, right? Like someone can make a negotiation with their soul and they can say, okay, I'll wait 3 months. And there's no real right answer here. It's just that each individual gets to decide, how long can I hold while they don't change?
Mm.
But at some point, we either have to let go, which is really what's being invited always in these pattern changing, these relationships that are expanding, is that the relationship is being invited to be liberated, right? Like I talked about in breakups, if one person, the relationship's not for them, it's not for the other person. They just don't know yet. They just haven't accepted that truth. And so when I say to someone, hey, I'm really interested in this, is what I want to do. What do you think about it? And they're like, nah. It's like, well, what am I going to do? Spend my whole life trying to I'm going to stay small
Mm.
so that they feel accommodated. So I'm going to
Yes.
shrink to keep them comfortable. Meanwhile, I'm going to get sick. Like something's going to happen to me because in order to avoid this breakup or this chaos or whatever I'm afraid of, which can be very real, I'm actually internalizing it.
Yeah.
And, you know, the answer I think is usually pretty clear to people eventually. And, Dr. Alexandra Solomon, who's a psychotherapist, she talks about how throughout our lifetime, we will have many marriages, and sometimes it will be to the same person. And I love that because it shows that as relationships evolve and we evolve, the container has to keep changing. The
Yes.
relationship that we're in has to keep changing. We keep having to have the old ways we were, much like pre having kids, much like after having two kids or when the kids leave the house. Those versions of us keep having to die. and we keep getting the opportunity to expand and awaken, or whatever that might mean for somebody. And that's why I really think that the greatest path to spiritual evolution, like you were speaking about, that we meet these people and they all have a purpose to help us break free, to liberate ourselves. And I don't think there's a greater expansive mechanism than relationship. And I'll just finish that point saying that one of the questions I often ask people when they're trying to figure out the very complex question, should I stay or should I go? Is I ask them, is staying abandoning yourself, or is leaving? And often the thing that changes the pattern of how we've shown up our whole lives is usually the thing that's being asked. The thing that maybe requires us to choose ourselves for the first time, or maybe it requires us to actually surrender into love when we never have. Really, ultimately, relationships, usually in the codependent sort of way, are at the cost of ourselves for some people. And then for other people, the relationship suffers because of self. Like they're so individualistic that they don't know how to connect and share a life with someone.
It's so funny how it circles back to being authentic, which we were talking about at the start of this conversation. And then it reminds me of all the palliative care workers and doctors I've spoken to who say on the deathbed of the person, the number one regret is that I wasn't my authentic self. I had a partner that I couldn't express myself to, and I stayed in a box because I didn't want to upset them, but I never fulfilled the life that I had seen for myself and that I wished for. And so when you bring up the point of it will make you sick, it just rings so true. And, I mentioned to you, I just spoke to Gabor Mate, and he talks a lot about that stuff. Because if we're not being our authentic self, and within relationships, that's the number one key thing. And if we're evolving and our partner's not evolving, and then we feel that we can't talk to them about things, and then we rely heavily on our friends, be it girlfriends, boyfriends, whoever, it's just like, it's like two walking, what is it, like ships in the night kind of thing, that you're just passing each other by, and
right.
there's no depth there anymore. And I think it is easy for people to stay in relationships when they have kids, because it becomes not all about them. There's the kids as well, and the kids' feelings and stuff like that. But, kids aren't silly. They can see when a relationship isn't working effectively, and, there doesn't even need to be fighting for it to be obvious. But when they see there's no connection or love between their parents, what's that signaling for them? What's that showing them? And I think that we as adults need to be really conscious of that.